Hello and welcome to Cup of Cosmology, the place for all your questions about the universe. My name is Diana Hooper and I'm a postdoctoral researcher currently at the Helsinki Institute of Physics over in Finland, where I study cosmology. So that means that I study the universe, the contents of the universe, how everything evolves, how everything interacts, basically everything happening inside the universe. It's really fun. I love studying cosmology. I love being a cosmologist. I really enjoy learning about all of the crazy, weird, fun things happening in the universe, and I love sharing this with everyone. So, hey, Paul in first. Hey, David Dunn. Great to see all the regulars coming in as always. So nice to see you. Welcome back to Cup of Cosmology, and for first-time viewers, welcome. Everyone's welcome here. This is a place where you can ask all your questions about the universe. Hello, James. Nice to see you as well. As always, got all of the regulars coming in. Perfect. So yeah, I'm a theoretical physicist. I study cosmology, all of the cool things happening inside the universe. I mean, I don't study everything in the universe, but at least some of the fun topics in the universe. And I'm here on Cup of Cosmology, going out live to YouTube and to Twitter to just chat about the universe because it's a fun topic and I like just answering random questions about the universe, about space, about science, about academia. Always a lot of fun topics, a lot of fun questions. Hey, David Howden, great to see you as well. Very, very nice to see you coming in as well. How was the week of conferences? Thank you for that question, David. That is the perfect opening question today. So it's been a fun week. I am currently attending the Cosmology from Home conference. So Cosmology from Home is a conference that is designed entirely to be online. It is, instead of the usual format of just take a conference, now we can do it in person, now we just throw it on Zoom. Cosmology from Home is designed specifically to be in an online format. So Cosmology from Home kickstarted on Monday, which means we're at the end of the first week of Cosmology from Home. This is the third edition of the conference, and we have a second week going as well. Hey, Scott, great to see you. Don't worry, you're not late. There's always a few minutes margin. You could call it the academic 5 minutes, which is when people start academic events 5 minutes late to allow for late people coming in, which personally I disagree with. You should always start on time. But anyway, no worries. There's no set time. You can always come late. It's never a problem. You're always welcome here, regardless of what time you turn up. So yeah, Cosmology from Home is a 2-week conference. We are now at the end of week 1. Straight after Cosmology from Home, which is an online conference, I am traveling to 2 in-person conferences. One of them is in Vienna. One of them is in Italy, in the Alps. And it's going to be fun because they're going to be in-person conferences, and I love in-person conferences. And I'm also very, very, very worried that I'm going to catch COVID at one of the 2 conferences because there are no mask mandates at either of the conferences. And yeah, this is very worrying to me. Not at all the way things should be. Briefly considered pulling out of the conferences, but yeah, we'll see. Should be going to those 2. And of course, got another week of Cosmology from Home. So because this whole month I'm basically in some type of conference or another, I thought this would be a fun topic to chat about today. Before we jump into how are the conferences going, what are conferences, and all of the usual things, as David is just saying here in the comments, if you like this stream, please do click the like button, leave a comment down below, subscribe to the YouTube channel if you haven't done so already, because this is how I build my audience. This is how you help me to grow. I'm still building up the audience after recently migrating from HAPS over to YouTube after HAPS closed down. So any way you can help spread the word, share a Cup of Cosmology is a big help to me, because then we can rebuild the audience, and the more audience I have, the more fun questions I get, and then it leads to more fun discussions. And if anybody feels like supporting Cup of Cosmology, thank you. I honestly appreciate it so much. Anything you can give me for Cup of Cosmology means a lot to me. I have a Ko-fi. You can buy me a cup of coffee. You should see the link appearing down below on the screen. Of course, absolutely no obligation. Cup of Cosmology is and always will be free. Just if you feel like throwing money at it, please do so. I would appreciate it a lot, but never, never, ever any pressure or obligation to do so. And I've been told that I'm very bad at self-promotion because I keep forgetting to show this link to advertise it. So yeah, I'm doing the self-promotion. Don't like doing that. Okay, so some nice questions here. Comment from Paul: your dad grew up in Vienna, Austria. Now you live in Vienna, Virginia. Nice. Yeah, I love Vienna. Vienna's my 3rd favorite city that I've visited. I did an Erasmus in Vienna, so that's a 1-year exchange program where I went and did the last year of my undergrad studies in Vienna. Absolutely love the city, love the people there. It was a really cool place. But I've never visited Vienna in Virginia, so that's a new one to go to. Need to go there at some point. Need to come and visit you, Paul. But yeah, I would love to go to visit Vienna and Virginia as well. If it's anything like Vienna in Europe, I'm sure it will be nice. So, great question from James here about, do you get any free time for tourism in each location? Now, one thing that is really cool about conferences is that it allows us often to travel to really cool places to meet cool people. And traveling to places is something I love. I love traveling, I always have. The more countries I visit, the happier I am. Just learning about other people's culture, other people's experience, and just getting to appreciate other cities is one of the most amazing things here. So it's one of the most amazing things we can do with our life. Is what I think. It's just really nice to be able to travel. It's obviously a privilege, and I'm always very happy to travel. So one nice thing about going to academic conferences is being able to travel to cities. Now, of course, we do have to be very careful with this because we are in a climate crisis. We should not be flying around every other week to an international city. We should not be adding to our carbon footprint. And especially, there are alternatives. We have found that there are other ways of doing conferences. Going to conferences is fun, but we always do need to be aware of what we're doing. And I think that's something that has become a very interesting topic that people are more aware of in the last few years. Can you really justify traveling halfway across the world for one conference? If so, is it worth it? So these are all important questions that need to be asked. But back to answering the question, sometimes there is time to visit the cities. It very much depends on the conference. I went to a conference once that was so back to back packed with talks. It basically ended up being like 12 hours a day of conferences, and then you go out for a social event with the people you've met at the conference. And by the time you break away from all of the colleagues and everything, it's like 10 o'clock at night, 11 o'clock at night, and I would just get to the hotel and crash. But often conferences are set up where maybe there's a free afternoon, or maybe there's a couple of hours someday, or maybe you just decide to skip a day of the conference and go sightseeing. So I always try to get at least a bit of sightseeing in, just to really take in the city. There's also the thing that usually you travel a bit before or a bit after. If the conference starts on Monday, you might travel in on the Sunday. If it finishes on the Friday, you might leave on the Saturday. But they are work events, and often it's the case that the trips to the conferences are paid for by the universities. If you're going as an invited speaker, it's possible the conference organizers will pay. Otherwise, usually your own travel budget with the university or whoever your grant comes from pays for it. And at that point, it is a work event. And while a bit of tourism, a bit of sightseeing is good, it is also a work event. But of course, I do try to get as much out of my trips as possible. And I will go and visit as much of the cities as I can, especially Vienna, because the conference is actually taking place. The conference venue that I'm going to in Vienna is actually in the same street as where I used to live when I was there as an Erasmus student. It's like 10 steps away from where I used to live. So being back in my old neighborhood, the place I lived for a year, it's going to be really fun to go back and see how much the city has changed in the 8 years since I was there. So there is a bit of time to do a bit of tourism. It's not why we're there, but we do try to get some tourism in as well. Just some more comments there. Travel to places is a fun benefit of going to conferences. Absolutely. Question coming in from Paul. Do you prefer a narrow focus or a conference? Oh, it just moved. Do you prefer a narrow focus or a conference that covers a wider range of related topics? See, this is a really cool question. There's multiple different ways that conferences take place and different types of conferences. Now, sometimes they are more focused, sometimes they are more broad. Now, I'm using the generic word conference here, but there's actually 3 different types of events that we go to. There are conferences, there are workshops, and there are schools. Now, schools are usually a bit longer. Schools might be more designed towards really going in depth in a very narrow topic and learning about it. Some of the most fun schools I've participated in, for an example, are schools on how to write and develop codes. And then you get a bunch of tutors, you have hands-on exercises, and it's really just like a short lecture period where you learn about a specific topic or about something that is really relevant. And these have much more hands-on time. There might be some lectures, there might be some exercise sessions, and they're usually fewer participants. So those are workshops. Sorry, those are schools. Those are schools. Workshops is usually more focused on bringing together a bunch of people who are experts on one topic and kind of brainstorming. So then you might have, maybe you go to a workshop on dark matter, and then it's a lot of experts who work on dark matter, just trying to really smash their brains together and see if we can come up with any cool ideas, see what happens, see what you can really get out of these conferences. And I find that workshops are much more focused. There's often a lot of time for discussion as well, and not as much time for talks, because the point of workshops is to sit down and really work stuff out together. So there we have the schools, which is much more focused on learning, and usually more early career researchers will go to schools. Workshops are just let's all sit down together, gather all the experts on X topic, and see what we can figure out about this specific topic. And then there are the conferences. And the conferences usually have a much broader focus, whereby you might be people working on dark matter, but from different perspectives. So you might, for example, organize a workshop on how can we understand dark matter using cosmological simulations, whereas a conference might just be dark matter conference in general. So it very much depends. Some workshops are probably more focused, schools have a specific topic. Conferences, it very much depends. So the conference that I'm in this week and next week is called Cosmology from Home. The topic is cosmology. It's very, very, very broad topic. And because of the special format that this conference has and the fact that it's running for 2 weeks, there are a lot of talks. So we actually have, in Cosmology from Home this year, Cosmology from Home 2022, there are 12 plenary talks. Now, the plenary talks are the bigger talks, longer talks, usually given by experts in the field. And these are people who come and give an overview of a topic, talking also about their own work, but usually more of a broader perspective and not just this is what I've worked on, but like this is the current status of this topic. We have 12 plenary talks this year. Then there's the parallel talks. Now, the parallel talks are where people say, like, I've figured out this specific thing, or I've got a new paper on this topic, I want to talk about this topic. And you request a parallel talk. Parallel talks, as the name implies, happen in parallel. So you might have one parallel session on CMB, you might have one parallel session on dark matter, you might have one on modified gravity, and then you pick which one you go to. The parallel talks are usually much shorter, so the plenary ones are about 45 minutes. The parallel talks, this is in general at most conferences, numbers change a bit. Parallel talks are usually shorter, somewhere between 15 and 25 minutes, and they're very much focused on a specific topic. There, people will usually spend more time talking about their own work. It's 25 minutes to 15 minutes to present, this is what I've been working on, this is what I'm doing. So then you don't provide necessarily all of the background, you just really talk about your own work. And the parallel talks are a great place for especially early career researchers to promote their work, to get known among other scientists, and to kind of spread the word of, hey, this is who I am, and this is what I'm working on, and this is why you should chat to me, because we could have fun conversations. Then, currently, using Cosmology from Home as an example, over the course of the 2 weeks, we have 120 parallel conversations happening this week. 120 parallel talks. 12 plenaries, 120 parallels. Cosmology from Home also features flash talks, which some conferences all do as well. And flash talks are very short talks, somewhere between 2 and 5 minutes. It's just really like, here's a spoiler, here's a teaser. And you just give a really short thing about one project with the idea that then people are going to go and read up the paper or come and chat to you. And these are usually a great place for potentially PhD students who might not want to give a full 20-minute talk, just to say like, hey, I'm working on this, please come chat to me about this. I've also seen some flash talks by professors just briefly advertising their group, like, hey, this is my group, this is what we do in my group, come chat to any of us. And then a lot of conferences will also feature posters. Now, posters is where you prepare like an A4, sorry, not an A4, an A0 or an A1 size poster where you present a topic, you pin it to a wall, and then you hope somebody will walk by and ask you about your poster. Usually there's a dedicated time where you stand in front of your poster and people will come and ask you questions about it. So I know this is just an info dump here as usual. You can ask me questions at any point. And all of this to say that the focus of the different events is very different. So I said just now that Cosmology from Home is very, very, very broad. With 120 parallel talks, 12 plenary talks, plus all the flash talks, it's basically over 140 different topics that are presented. Obviously, nobody's going to be interested in every single one of those. You don't work on 140 different things, right? So the good thing about conferences is you can really choose what you listen to, what you want to engage in, and it's also a chance to touch with research you might never connect to. So, for an example, I am not a modified gravity person. Modified gravity comes from the idea of saying maybe our understanding of gravity is incorrect or incomplete. What can we do to fix this? It's not something I've ever worked on. It's something that I'm vaguely curious about. So going to some of these talks, like, hey, I've been told this is a good talk. Watch it, learn about modified gravity. It's excellent. So the question that I'm somewhat getting around that I wanted to answer, but that lets me brush up on a lot of topics here, is are conferences more broad or more focused? So sometimes you can have very focused conferences, but then you can also have very broad ones like Cosmology from Home, where you have a bunch of different topics, and then you choose what you go to. Of course, when there's parallel sessions, you choose which parallel session to go to. You might not watch any of the others. One very big advantage of Cosmology from Home versus a normal in-person conference, again, Cosmology from Home is a purely virtual conference that is taking place these 2 weeks. And one big advantage is that all of the talks are pre-recorded. This means that all of the speakers record their talks ahead of time and sending the recordings. So by the time we participants get the talks, they're pre-recorded, they're uploaded, and we can watch them in our own time, in our own schedule. And then the live part of the conversation is just a discussion. So everyone goes to the live session, assume with the knowledge we've already watched the talk. Now we're just here to have the Q&A. And it really works well because it means even if the Q&A of several talks that you might want to watch is overlapping, you can still watch the talks themselves. Whereas in an in-person conference, it happens often, as David is saying here in the comments, happens often that there might be 3 talks you want to listen to and they're all taking place at the same time, and then you have to choose. In an ideal conference, when there's parallel sessions, the rooms are close by, because then you can run in between the rooms. Like, I want to listen to talk 1 here and talk 2 there and talk 3 there, and then you run. Or you just sit through a session to listen, 6 talks to listen to one you want to. One nice thing about doing pre-recorded talks for Cosmology from Home is that, maybe I can watch 5 of one session and skip the one I'm not really interested in, and then watch one from another session. I can't participate in all of the Q&As, all of the discussions, but you can participate in the talk itself. And I know I just missed a bunch of comments, so let me just go back to the comments here. So there's a comment from Paul about, I always picture the best brainstorming happening after the workshop in the bar. Yeah, there are often fun conversations that take place after the conference. And I will come back to this point because I want to make several points related to that. The parallel talks never intersect. Yeah. Change intersect back to intersect, yes. Posters, you've done many of those, David? Yeah. I think everyone does posters at some point. They are great to do. They are so much more work than you ever expect. Every time I've done a post, I go and thinking, it's a poster, and then it takes so long to do. Okay, there's I see I missed a lot of comments here. So, question from Paul: are you responsible to come back to your group after the conference and present on the things you heard? Now, that is an excellent point, excellent question, and it very much depends on the group and on the conference. So it's not usually the case. It can be that sometimes one group member might go to a conference that a lot of people are interested in, and then we might summarize it. We have done this in some of the groups I've worked in, where it's like, okay, here are some fun things I learned. That can be useful, and it very much depends. Some people like doing this, some people don't, but there is no obligation for me to do this. If I go to an in-person conference, when I come back to the office, I'm sure people are going to informally ask, like, hey, did you learn anything? How was the conference? Tell me about it. but I'm not expected to then come back and give a presentation on what I've learned. However, this also depends. I know some PhD students do this, where the supervisor might say, go to the conference, but then come back and tell me about it. This can also be the case. There have been times where we've done this more informally, where I've come back from a conference and said, like, hey, does anyone want a summary of the highlights? Because I learned some really cool stuff. And, if you volunteer to do this, people will always say yes. So it can be done. Cosmology from Home, for example, is a 2-week-long conference. I'm not going to go give a summary of the 2-week-long conference to everyone, especially as with Cosmology from Home. Once the conference ends, a lot of the videos are actually made publicly available if the speakers agree. This is the whole thing that they're never made publicly available during the conference, which I have opinions on. They should be made publicly available to everyone, but it's the conference organizer's decision. And most of the talks, if the speakers agree, will actually be made publicly available at the end of the conference. So then anyone who wants to watch Cosmology from Home talks can go and watch them, assuming the speakers agree to make it public. Slightly off-topic question here from Scott. Is modified gravity essential, or are you trying to get rid of dark matter? Not all modified gravity models are, but some are. So there's different types of modified gravity. There's also something called modified Newtonian dynamics, which changes how gravity behaves on kind of smaller scales, and this is trying to get rid of dark matter. Modified gravity can also be used as an alternative to dark energy. It's just saying maybe our understanding of gravity is wrong. Maybe it's too simplified and we need to extend our model of gravity. But that's getting off topic. If you just solve the time travel thing, you can listen to all talks. Yeah, that's one way of doing it. I haven't yet figured that out. I guess I need to go to more conferences to figure out how to do that. Right, so far I've given you kind of an overview of what type of scope conferences have, what type of talks you get at a conference. Now, of course, we go to a conference partly for the talks, to listen to what's new in the field, what's going on, what type of research are people doing, or to learn more about a topic if it's maybe a workshop or a school. But the talks are only one aspect of it. Yeah, I mentioned modified gravity, so it is a fair question to ask, absolutely. As always, you are always free to ask anything. If it's slightly off topic, I will probably mostly ignore it or just answer it and go off topic. So, of course, listening to talks, learning what's happening in the field is very, very important. But to me, it is not the most important thing that happens at conferences. One of the biggest things about these events is actually the networking. It's where you get to meet people who you might not have known before. It's where you get to re-find people. There's a thing in academia that we move country a lot. You might finish your PhD and move country. You start a postdoc, then you move country for the next postdoc. And even if you stay in the same country, it's quite likely that you move group. And that means that any friends that you make during your PhD, for example, who are also in the group, will be spread out in different countries by the time you're 3 years down the line. And if I think of people who I would consider friends in academia, they're spread over about 12 different countries by now. So, of course, it's always hard to see these people. And it's also often the case that, I started projects during my PhD. I still have collaborators across the world who, every time we meet, we come back to a project like, hey, we have this ongoing project. And when the person's the other side of the world, you don't really have the chance to work on it as much. But once you're both in the same room, it's like, I guess we should actually work on this now. So conferences are great for the networking and for the people, because you can both meet new people, re-find old people, make new connections. It's also great for early career researchers to get their name out there, because you get to meet the people whose papers you've read. You might have read 50 papers by somebody, and suddenly you get to meet them at a conference. And try not to be starstruck. It happens to everyone. It happens to all of us. Like, oh my God, I can't believe this person's here. The fun thing is when you go give a talk, and your talk is heavily reliant on papers of other people, and these other people are in the room, and then you're like, oh, these people know more about this topic than I do. They don't. You know the most about the topic you are presenting. This is something that's fine. It always happens, but there is always a sense of, oh wow, important person. It's fun. You get to meet the people whose papers you read, but also for early career researchers. Now, we know that the academic job market is highly competitive. Unfortunately, there's a whole other rant to be had for another day about the academic job market. But I know that the postdoc position I have currently, 200 people applied for. You know, the previous one that I got, another bunch of people applied for it. There are hundreds of people applying for one or two positions. It is highly competitive. And if people are going through and they just see a name on a paper, in an ideal case, it shouldn't matter. But it does matter if they know you. If you go from being a name on a paper to a face they saw at a conference, and someone they can remember, like, hey, this person gave a good talk at this conference I went to, you've just created that connection. And unfortunately, this is still very, very necessary. Which is, of course, very much not fair for introverts, for neurodivergent people who might not be as good at networking because networking is set up around specific neurotypical people and does not consider other people's needs. The way conferences, the way the whole thing is set up very much for specific people. Unfortunately, this is something we need to do better, and this is something we need to change. But, rant aside, I did say I wouldn't rant today. Like, I told myself I wouldn't. Knew that wasn't going to be the case. That aside, it is very important to network. It is a very important part. And just going to a conference and meeting a professor, it's something that you think, on the one hand, I'm meeting professors who one day might be hiring me. And on the other hand, I'm meeting the people I might want to invite for talks in the future. Most of the people I've met who I might want to collaborate with, I've met at conferences or at these events. And then when people ask me, like, okay, we might be thinking about who do we invite to give seminars in the group next year, and then you remember, okay, I remember seeing in a couple of conferences this person who gave an excellent talk on axions, and now I need a speaker on axions. This is the person I invite, and these people from going and seeing their talks at conferences. So one of the huge aspects of conferences is this networking, and going, meeting people, meeting peers who in the future are going to be your collaborators, meeting professors who might one day want to hire you, meeting people who might one day, be somebody you collaborate with. This is one of the biggest things of conferences. Once again, I'm getting delayed with the comments. Question from Paul. Is the moving country thing particular to Europe, or do US postdocs do that also? Now, technically, it is widespread. Most people will move. Now, within the US, there is a thing that there are like 9 or 10 universities specifically that just like passing people back and forth. So people might start at MIT and then go to Harvard, and there are some connections there where people might just cycle around specific universities that seem to have certain unspoken agreements that people will just be passed on. But in general, people do tend to move because, on the one hand, you meet more collaborators, you go to different research groups, it looks good academically for you to move country. And also, sometimes there's just not a position available at the place you want to stay when you need the position. Now, of course, the US has the advantage that there's a lot of different universities, a lot of different research groups. Moving country is something that a lot of us have to do. I'm on my 6th country now, getting to the point where I feel like I've moved enough. I'm ready to stop moving country by now. Maybe a difficult question from James. I love difficult questions. Is there a field of cosmology that is hot right now, that is on the cusp of a new discovery? There are quite a few, actually. There's quite a few hot topics. Some people will tell you that some topics are more or less hot topics, but there are some, and it's always nice to go to conferences and see like what's new. Like, one example I can give is machine learning currently, seeing how machine learning can be applied to cosmology. 5 years ago, nobody was talking about this. At Cosmology from Home, I think we have 5 talks on machine learning this year, maybe more. And it's all it feels like it's going somewhere. There's also 21 centimeter astronomy, is something that's going to be really big in the future. It's something we're all looking forward to. There's a bunch of new satellites and experiments that are going to be built soon. but it very much there's quite a few things. There's also, gravitational wave astronomy is just a field that's starting, well, not starting now, but now is when we can actually say, like, hey, look, we've measured gravitational waves. It's a hot topic. I think you can't go to a conference these days and not hear about primordial black holes. So there are some topics that are appearing more. There's always these trends. There's some topics that come and go, some that are always around. And it is fun to see how the conference landscape has changed. Like, the first academic conference I went to was called the CMB, What's Next After Planck? After the Planck had measured the amazing CMB, what comes next? And of course, if I'm going to throw out the word CMB, I need to bring an image up on screen. CMB, cosmic microwave background radiation, all this light in the universe. You've all heard me do this before. Now, this is what's measured by Planck, percent level precision. So then there is the question of, now that Planck has given us this, what do we do next? And the first academic conference I went to was what happens after Planck. And now you go to any conference and people are talking about all of the other things you can do with the CMB, like spectral distortions and polarization. I did a whole stream about this recently because of reasons. So it's very interesting for me to see how the discussions have changed in the short amount of time I've been in the field. We've gone from asking what can we do next year to actually doing it. And it's very, very interesting for me to see this. I know this is a bit off topic. Okay. Done that one. Interesting point about whether things like Cosmology from Home Conference flip the advantages upside down and that introverts or other personality types just strive. Excellent point, Paul. I'll come back to that. I was the only applicant who had a cup of Cosmology show. Yeah, a cup of Cosmology, I'm reasonably sure it does help me a lot. Like, just the outreach experience that I have does help me. Do funding bodies and the like attend these conferences? Great question. CMB, yes, CMB had to appear. So yeah, funding bodies don't necessarily attend these conferences. They're not there, like, it's not like someone's there with a record label waiting to sign the next big singer. It's not like that. But funding agencies is a very abstract term, right? It's a funding agency. It's an agency that gives you money. It's a funding body. But the funding bodies are made up of people. Now, of course, there's going to be a lot of people who are no longer doing science, who might never be doing science. But it's often the case, if you apply for funding, your grant application is going to be peer-reviewed. Now, what does peer review mean? It means a bunch of people at the same academic level or with expertise in the topic will review the application and give feedback. Now, the people who might be on these panels are also going to be at conferences. Now, technically, these people have to be very, very much unbiased, and if it's done in a fair way, they don't know whose application they're refereeing at a given time. But it is absolutely a thing that I've been told of, like, oh, you should go to this conference because these people are there and these people work in funding agencies, and it's just good for them to be aware of you. It shouldn't be the case. It should not work like this. And in an ideal situation, people have completely blinded applications where they cannot get any personal information about who the person is who's sent in that application. We do not live in an unbiased world, unfortunately. So while funding bodies themselves might not be at these conferences, it definitely can't hurt to be visible at these conferences. So now I want to go back to a comment we had earlier, because I'm just talking about the networking aspect. And the networking aspect is both, during the coffee breaks, where you might go up to someone like, hey, you gave a great talk, can we chat? But it also goes beyond that, because most conferences, in the evenings, everybody's going to go get dinner. You probably grab a bunch of people and go grab dinner together. Who brought up academia? Oh no. Yeah. I knew that today's topic would lead to a few potential rants. I'm keeping the ranting controlled mostly. So you might, at the end of the conference day, you grab people and you go out for dinner. And then oftentimes you still discuss work over dinner. And then it's always the thing of, like, how many hours was I in the conference, plus how many hours was I actually talking about work outside of the conference? Paul made the comment earlier that a lot of the brainstorming happens in the evening over alcohol. I would agree that a lot of the fun discussions happen in the evening at the dinners. the ones you might organize yourself, or the conference dinners that the organizers put on. This is a good event to go and meet people and catch COVID. So there are a lot of chances for that. And now I have an issue. I have a problem or a complaint that too much of academic conferences revolve around the consumption of alcohol. There will be a reception at the first day of a conference. There will be alcohol served. It's kind of this expectation that you might get drunk with your colleagues. Personally, I'm very much against this. I think I'm not an alcohol drinker. I might have like a glass of wine once every few weeks at most, and very much special occasions. But there's very much a drinking culture where, we've all just had a long conference day, let's go out and get drunk together. Yeah. I think colleagues and alcohol should probably not mix. Colleagues, alcohol, and power imbalance between people are a very bad mix. Yeah. That's a whole thing. That's a discussion that needs to be had. That personally, I think too many scientific events revolve around the consumption of alcohol. For one thing, it's discriminatory against people who don't drink alcohol for religious reasons. It's a problem for people who don't want to be peer pressured into drinking alcohol. It's just, in general, as a society, we should move past peer pressure alcohol drinking. But that's an aside there. But yeah, back to the initial question there, I do think a lot of the brainstorming, a lot of the networking, a lot of that does actually happen outside of the conference venue, in the coffee break, when you go to lunch together in the evenings. This is where you really grab a person, sit down and chat, and hopefully not physically, but where you sit down and chat to someone and actually have fun conversations. And these fun conversations, this networking aspect, this is just socializing with people, is one of the most fun things about the conference, one of the most valuable and one of the most fun things. And then that brings us back to the question that nobody asked, but I'm doing it anyway. I'm just pretending someone did, of can we really do this with online conferences? Now, the last couple of years, we've been forced to go to online conferences, and this was absolutely necessary. And it's something we should have done before. We shouldn't have waited until the pandemic. Now, online conferences have a lot of advantages over in-person conferences. Online conferences are more accessible. They are just, in general, it's easier for people to attend them. You don't have a carbon footprint of people traveling all the way across the world, so that's nice. It's easier for people who have caring responsibilities. If you have kids, if you have a person at home who you need to care for, a family member you need to look after, maybe you can just suddenly travel halfway across the world for a conference. So there are a lot of advantages in terms of accessibility, in terms of equity, in terms of just social responsibility. Online conferences really help us in a lot of ways. And of course, there's the whole thing about the fact that conferences are expensive. And oftentimes, I already did this, I think it was last week, so I'm going to keep this part short. Conferences we usually pay for ourselves and then get reimbursed from the university, which means for a short amount of time, or however long the administrative people take, this is something that, it's going to be my expense. I will then get reimbursed. This puts people at a disadvantage. It just favors people from an affluent background. It favors the typical people who are always favored by this system, which are the cis-het white men from middle-class backgrounds. These are the people who are going to be more likely to attend conferences. So virtual events really offer a lot of alternatives to this. And then, of course, there's the question of what happens to the networking aspect, because if you're just on Zoom, you miss all of that. And there are models in place that have been proposed to solve this. And Cosmology from Home is a good example of this. Now, Cosmology from Home has a virtual conference space that you can move around and talk to people. It has fixed schedule, fixed social times. You can just go in and chat. The other day, I wanted to just see who would turn up if I started something. So I just posted in the Slack channel for Cosmology from Home, like, hey, I'm in one of the Zoom rooms. I put up a live stream of some birds in Finland. There's a bird nest. Come join me and birdwatch together. 35 minutes later, there were 8 of us in the room discussing how journal clubs should work in academia and how we should organize events for early career researchers. And this is just because I said, like, hey, bird stream in this room, come join me. So there are ways to get these conversations to happen even without being there in person. There are things in place that we can try. Now, for some people, in-person conferences are always going to be better. Some people want to travel. Some people want to have this networking experience. And this is why I think the way to go in the future is virtual conferences. People who want to go in person can go in person. People who want to join online can join online. And we have the technology. We have the birds we were watching was an osprey nest, so it's a little type of hawk. There's this camera set up in the osprey nest, and it's really photographic, amazing area where you've got like a Finnish lake in the background and a bunch of amazing trees. A couple months ago, there were just little baby eggs, and now there's 3 little baby ospreys in the nest, and they're not yet big enough to fly. So you constantly have these 3 little baby ospreys and the mother and father bird coming and going. It's amazing. I can share the link later. It's a really, really fun stream. It's just the live stream is constantly going there. So I think hybrid events are the way to go. Hybrid conferences. Some people can attend in person, some people can attend remotely. If given the choice for a lot of conferences, I would attend remotely because then I lower my carbon footprint. If there's a way of socializing in the online format as well, then it works and it's worth doing, and then I don't have to travel halfway across the world for one conference. So I think that is one option. I think another thing, and really, I really, really hope that we go for this. I'm honestly a bit frustrated that the 2 conferences I'm going to in person don't have a hybrid option. They're both conferences that are going to be really interesting for me, and I really, really want to listen to the talks, meet these people. But if there were a hybrid option, honestly, I would probably be joining remotely and not going in person. And there isn't, because people have decided that the pandemic is over, even though the pandemic is not over. So there's like another wave going through most countries, and everyone's like, no, pandemic's over. It's not, but people have decided it is. Does hybrid make the remote person feel like a second-class attendee compared to a conference where everyone is virtual or everyone is in person? This is an excellent point, Paul, and I think it very much depends on the conference. I've attended a couple of hybrid conferences recently. Some were done well, some were not. Now, I've seen some people not be able to set up a hybrid talk where the camera doesn't work or the speaker is speaking with their back to the camera, so people in the audience can figure it out and people at home can't. But I've seen others that are done really well. There was one recently where half of the speakers were remote, half of them were in person. And then it just worked out when they asked the speakers, like, do you want to be in person? Do you want to be remote? And then it didn't feel like there was such a barrier. Anytime there was a discussion happening in person, the online connection was there as well. So then people who were online had this option also to participate in the discussion. And the organizers were asking people online if they have questions, as well as asking people in the room. I think nobody's found the perfect formula yet, but it can be done. We've proven over the last 2 years, that online conferences do work. And we know that in-person conferences do work. And finding a hybrid where it works for everyone, to me, makes the most sense. And I really wish going forward that all conferences would be hybrid. For health reasons, people might not want to travel. For personal reasons, people might not want to travel. People might have carers, people might have economic responsibilities. There are just so many reasons why people might not want to travel to a conference. And I don't think it's fair that people who, for whatever reason, can't or don't want to travel are excluded from these events. And of course, some people want to go back to in person, and that's fine. I get it. People are tired of Zoom. And this is why I think hybrid is the way to go. There was also a comment some time ago that I ignored about if Cosmology from Home, which is entirely an online format, is better for introverts. Now, I think it's definitely better for introverts or people who might have social anxiety for whatever reason. Online conferences are better for that. But there is still always a barrier and always a threshold. Right? I'm sometimes extroverted, sometimes introverted. Very much depends on the day. Given the choice, I would usually choose to be alone, but in a conference and I know I'm there to network, I will go up and speak to random people. But this is something that it is something that I can do, and not everyone can, because for whatever reason, a lot of people don't feel comfortable doing this, and that is perfectly fine. I think it's nice to have kind of events where there's a facilitator for a conversation. You know, the first conference I went to, I basically followed my PhD advisor around, and he introduced me to people. And I think it's nice in online conferences and in-person conferences to have some type of thing to help people get to know people. Kind of like, hey, have you met this person? One thing that Cosmology from Home has done this year, which is an amazing idea, is a buddy program where people who might have attended a conference before, or people who are experienced in the field, are acting as mentors, and people who might be attending their first ever conference or first time at Cosmology from Home apply as a mentee, and then people are paired together, and the mentors kind of just help the mentees with the conference. And I think this is an incredibly good idea. And I didn't participate in the mentoring, the buddy program this year, just because I knew my time constraints wouldn't make it feasible for me. But I think it's a really, really good idea, and this is something that should be done. Yeah, there's just small things like this that conference organizers can do to make the experience better for everyone. And I know I missed some questions again there, so let's go back. If I missed anyone's questions, feel free to ask again. I think there was something else that I said, oh, I'll come back to that later, and perhaps I've not come back to that later. Deanna gets drunk on the CMB. Yeah, I don't need alcohol. All I need is the CMB and my love for the cosmos. Sounds so pretentious. But yeah, you know, some people drink alcohol, some people don't, and I think conferences shouldn't revolve around alcohol consumption. Comment from Scott: you're not an alcohol drinker because your life is still fun and interesting. I mean, you know, let's not get into why people do and don't drink alcohol. I'm not going to go there. I have nothing against people drinking alcohol, really. You know, I'm not in any way criticizing anyone for drinking alcohol. It's everyone's personal choice. But it should be exactly that, a personal choice, and not something that people are peer pressured into doing, especially not at academic conferences. Comment from David Howden: you must admit that you're feeling a bit sick of virtual events. Yeah, I get that. I really do get that. I get that people are tired of virtual events and people want to go back in person. I also know that every in-person conference that I've heard of since the beginning of this year, there has been a COVID outbreak. And it's like, come on, people. We know that masks work. We know that doing self-tests work. If you fly 200 people into a conference venue from all over Europe or from all over the world, there's going to be a COVID outbreak. With proper measures, we can contain it. If people are just sort of like, yeah, go mingle, masks off, pandemic is over, there is going to be an outbreak. They will become super spreader events. But I know people who've been to these conferences who've been extremely careful and who didn't catch it. And I'm hoping I can be one of those people who is just so cautious that I don't catch it at conferences. But also, you can do everything right and still catch it. You know, it's not in any way a moral failing if you catch COVID. Okay, I think I answered that one. I find the audience questions bit works better online, as the questions get curated by the chair and the more of a comment than a question ones don't get put. Yes. Every single time you go to a conference, there is always someone, usually a more senior person in the conference, who at the end of the talk will say, I don't really have a question, I have a comment, and then we'll probably talk for 5 minutes about how what they've done is relevant, even though it might not be. And yeah, the online conferences, you can kind of moderate for that and like, okay, let's maybe not answer that question in live, and you can give your comment more than a question later, or do it in your own talk. So yeah, on the other hand, you could also implement something like this in a hybrid system very easily, where you have an anonymous webpage where people can ask questions, other people can vote up the questions, and then the most voted questions get read out. This works remarkably well. I've seen this at conferences and it works really well. Especially offering the option to ask anonymous questions just takes so much pressure off of early career researchers who might be intimidated by the prospect of asking a question. You know, nobody wants to ask a stupid question. Nobody wants to be the person who asks the weird thing. It can be very intimidating to ask questions at conferences. And I think having the option, both in online conferences and in person conferences, having the option of asking questions anonymously is very, very, very necessary. But of course, there should be some moderation, because once you allow for anonymous questions, there needs to be some moderation. So I think this is something that is very easy to set up. There are web pages for this. You know, you can just put questions, people vote on them, and then you go through the most voted questions. If there's one that, for whatever reason, is something that should not be asked, the moderator or the chair or the host can choose not to ask it. Is there a location or university that is considered the center of the universe of cosmology? I think a lot of groups would like to think that they are, but there's no official one. There's been a lot of people working on cosmology in a lot of different places all over the world. You might find that specific topics are clustered, like people who work on gravity. There's a big cluster of people working on modified gravity in the UK, but there's also a bunch of people elsewhere in the world. So when you focus on specific topics, you might have standout institutes like string theory was very US based for a lot of years, but it also very much fluctuates and depends. So I would absolutely say there's not one preferred location. Cosmology, like the universe, is isotropic and homogeneous. It's the same everywhere you look in every direction. I still think we should call them telematrices, not mentees. Okay. Yeah. So hybrid online conferences have a lot of advantages for a lot of reasons. In-person conferences have the networking aspect, and I really, really, really do get that people want to go back to in-person events. Hybrid for me is the way to go. Also, on a personal note, now if I am traveling to a conference, I try to combine it with other things so that I don't feel like I'm only traveling for one conference, because for the last 5 years, I've been trying to reduce my carbon footprint as much as possible in every way I can. So after being humiliated by the workshop presenter multiple times, I lost my fear of asking stupid questions. Then that was an asshole workshop presenter, I'm sorry to say, because nobody should ever be made to feel bad for asking a question. If you have a question and you think it's a naive or stupid question, I can assure you there is at least one other person in the room with that same question. And if you ask the question, you are also asking it for others. And nobody should ever be made to feel bad about asking a question. And if someone makes you feel bad for asking a question, especially at a scientific event, then it's on them and not on you, because that is not what someone should do. No, the whole point of science is to ask questions. Questions should always, always, always be encouraged. And there are no stupid questions ever. There are just questions that are unanswered. And if you have the doubt, chances are someone else in the room has the doubt. Now, I say this, and of course, it took me a very long time to get over this barrier. At some conferences, I never asked questions, even though I had a lot of questions, just because I didn't feel like I should. I didn't feel like I could. There's also then the thing that goes with it. If you're the only person in the room who looks the way you look, then maybe you don't want to be the woman asking the questions. Or, of course, speaking as someone with white privilege here, this is just my very limited perspective. But I know that when you're the only person in the room who looks the way you look, there's a bigger threshold to ask questions. But yeah, I say now, there are no stupid questions you should always ask. But of course, in my first conferences, I never wanted to ask questions. And there are still sometimes when I go to events and it just feels like the atmosphere is not conducive to asking questions. And sometimes you might be in a Q&A session and there's just this really unnecessarily aggressive atmosphere, and I hate it. And it's like, why? We are literally all here to learn about science. Stop being aggressive. Put your egos down. Let's ask questions. And there are still events where I feel like I can't ask questions. Having the option to ask questions anonymously really gets rid of that barrier. So that is absolutely something that should be done at all conferences. So yeah, I was saying just now, for the last 5 years or so, I've done my best to reduce my carbon footprint as much as possible. And I was actually taking trains places instead of flying as much as I could. And now I've moved up to Finland, where just taking trains down to mainland Europe is ridiculously difficult. If I wanted to, my partner's in Germany, if I wanted to visit my partner by train, it would take me 26 hours. It takes 2.5 hours by plane. And at some point, it's like, yeah. But this means that now when I go traveling for something, I try to maximize the effort, and I think, or maximize the output of the event. And I think this is something that a lot of people can try to do as well. I went to Munich back in May for a conference. I also managed to string together an outreach event at the same time. So I was in Munich for 3 days, gave 2 talks, felt like a good trade-off, and then traveled around Europe a bit. The reason I'm going to these 2 in-person conferences back to back, they just happen to be 1 week apart, And that means that I catch one plane down to Vienna. Then from Vienna to Italy, I take the train, 8.5 hours through the Alps. Going to be spectacular, I hope. And then from Italy, I'm going to catch a series of trains and buses and so on, up to my partner's place in Germany and spend a week there, and then one flight back. So I get 3 countries done, including 2 conferences and a personal visit with only 2 flights. So this is something that I think a lot of us could ask of when we're going, if we go to an event in person, how can I optimize this so that my carbon footprint isn't just for one conference? But also then there's the thing that conferences are exhausting, and doing 2 conferences back to back, actually 3 with Cosmology from home, I'm going to be drained by the end of the month. Okay, thank you for that clarification, David. I'm very curious to now look up the origin of the word "meant." That sounds like a fun rabbit hole to go down to. I'm an economist by profession. Our conferences are famously rather aggressive in questioning style. I have heard that actually. It's just unnecessary. Like, why? Why do people do that? You know, I think so much could be improved if everyone was just a little bit kinder to each other. There is no reason to be aggressive, to be confrontational. We're all just trying to survive the mess that is the world. We're all just, at a conference, at an academic event. Academia is bad enough as it is. There's a lot of negativity in academia, and we're all just doing our best to survive and to do our science. We don't need to add to this by being assholes to each other. It's just like so unnecessary. And this is why I love working with people who are just kind, people who are nice. Like, I will choose someone who is nice over someone who's a renowned expert in their field any day of the week, because it's just unnecessary. We're all just doing our best to survive. Let's not make it harder for each other. Nowadays, you save all of your stupid questions for Sundays. As always, there are no stupid questions. And I will always, always be adamant of that. I have talked to flat earthers. I have dealt with people who have never had any exposure to science. And still, I am adamant there are never, ever any stupid questions. There are just questions that you haven't been able to ask yet. It doesn't matter if it sounds like a naive question. It doesn't matter. There are no stupid questions. This is one of the 3 rules of Cup of Cosmology. There are no stupid questions. Be kind to each other and be curious. Those are my 3 rules. They're written on the Cup of Cosmology webpage. No stupid questions. Be kind. Be curious. I know I've never actually stated the rules out loud, but they are written on the Cup of Cosmology webpage. Getting to the destination is half the fun. Yes, I completely agree with you, James. I would like it a lot more if I didn't have really, really bad motion sickness. I've got motion sickness in elevators before, which means the prospect of 8 hours on trains is horrible to me. I'm sure the views will be amazing. The journey will be an incredible experience, but also I know I'm going to spend that whole day feeling terrible. And yeah, that's just the way it is. I would like to be the type of person who writes books on trains, but if I open a book on a train, I'm going to be sick. And always show the CMB during the broadcast. That is not an official rule of Cup of Cosmology. It's just an unofficial rule that the CMB must always appear. But now that I have my super cool logo, I don't need to show the CMB every time because the CMB is in my logo. So I'm sure you've all seen the Cup of Cosmology logo by now, but I'm just looking for it on my slides. I should have a better system to do this. But where's my logo? I'm sure you've all seen the Cup of Cosmology logo by now. This amazing logo designed by my very, very good friend Sania Hiba. And it has the CMB in it. And because this appears at the start of every stream, I no longer need to do the effort of bringing up the CMB on screen because you always see the CMB with the logo. Just get drunk before the train ride. Yeah, then I'll have other issues. The thing about not drinking alcohol is it means my alcohol tolerance is really low. I can't remember who I was discussing with a friend recently that it would be highly amusing to do an episode of Cup of Cosmology where we're slightly tipsy. That could be very fun or very bad. I haven't yet figured out which, so we'll see. That's shelved for future. Okay, I just want to to leave on some comments for people, anybody watching who might be attending an academic conference, especially if it's if it's your first academic conference. It can always be overwhelming. It can always be difficult to know how to get the best out of a conference. And I think there are a few things that I would give as advice. And again, this is just based on my experience having attended a bunch of conferences, way too many by now. One thing is that you should never try to do everything. Some people go to conferences thinking they need to attend every single talk and go to every single event, and that's just going to lead to you being exhausted. Makes a lot more sense to pick your battles, maybe go to the events that are the most interesting, read the schedule in advance, pick out the events that you really want to go to, and go to those. And if you skip one morning because you just need to rest and need some alone time in your hotel, that's fine. That's perfectly fine. You do not have to attend every single event at the conferences. Most people won't attend every single event. Pick the ones you want to attend. Go to your friend's talk. Make sure you're there as a support, but you don't need to go to every single event. Another piece of advice I would give to anyone going to such an event is to scout out the list of participants in advance. Find the people you want to meet and try to meet them. And that also gives you the chance. There might be a professor you've always wanted to meet, or somebody who's written papers who you've always wanted to talk to. Just do your research. Spend 5 minutes figuring out what they're working on currently and prepare one question. And then you can just go up to this random, intimidating professor and hey, I have a question about your recent paper. And there you've got your opening. So don't try to go to everything. Scout out the participants and figure out who you want to talk to. And the biggest thing for me is figuring out what you want to get out of the conference before you go. Because sometimes you go to a conference I'm just going to go and see what happens. But having a plan, I'm here to learn about these things, to meet these people, to find an old friend and to visit a city. Go with a clear idea of what you want to get out from the conference and then how you can make that happen. But this is just from my own personal experience as someone who's gone to conferences. And again, I'm missing some comments. If I try to read on a train, I always fall asleep and wake up feeling awful. So I tend to listen to podcast things. Yeah, birdwatch out the windows, listening to podcasts. Those are things that I try to do. I listen to music. Anything that involves focusing. Sometimes I think I'm okay. I'm on a train, I'm feeling fine, and I just glance at a message on my phone, and so I'm like, oh, okay, putting the phone down for the next 5 hours again. Sometimes people message me hey, you're on a train, do you want to chat? I go, oh, please leave me alone. Just let me do my train journey with whatever I need to do to survive the train journey. But train journeys are technically amazing. They're very beautiful. It's always an experience, and I just wish I didn't have to deal with motion sickness on them. A Beethoven or Mozart Requiem concert in Vienna is great to calm any academia stress. Yeah, I am honestly really looking forward to going to Vienna. If I take out all of my COVID anxiety and actual just going to an in-person conference again, I am really, really looking forward to going back to Vienna. It's one of my favorite places, and I lived there for a year. And I will hopefully meet up with some people who I knew back in the day when I lived there. I'm just so looking forward to going back to Vienna again. As a music nerd, I'm so bummed that I'll never get to go to Vienna. Vienna is an amazing place if you like music. It's just a really, really nice place. Audiobooks. Yes, I actually have a bunch of audiobooks. I've always found that I have attention issues with audiobooks. If I pick up a book, I can usually read it. Not so much lately. I've honestly not been able to finish a book in a long time because my brain just cannot focus on reading. I want to skip to the conclusions and to the abstract and to the important equations. Reading academic papers has killed my love for reading, but that's a whole other thing I need to deal with. But every time I started on an audiobook, I get one chapter in and I realize I'm no longer listening. It's there's some voice in the background that I've just droned out. Audiobooks have just never worked for me. I've tried. And I have a bunch of audiobooks that I optimistically got in the idea of this is the audiobook that's going to convince me. Never works. Hey, Roger, great to see you. You coming just as I'm wrapping up. I will be shutting down the stream soon, but great to see you. Thank you for coming in. So, yeah, just, a few things, a few takeaways. I know I've been rambling for an hour. You all had some really cool questions about conferences. Academic conferences are a necessity. It's useful to get to know what's happening in the field, to keep up to date with topics. It's especially useful for the networking aspect. meeting people, interacting with people, having conversations, apart from the fact that it is super fun to just go and sit down with someone and chat about physics or about cool topics like that, or academia in general. It's just really fun to have these conversations. But I don't think this requires in-person conferences. There are ways of doing equal amount of stuff online. Cosmology from Home is an excellent example of a conference done well online. Personally, I think hybrid is the way to go. We should have events that are accessible to more people, more inclusive, more open, easier to attend, and where you can reduce your carbon footprint. And if people want to go in person, they have that option. Personally, I think hybrid conferences are the way to go. Hybrid conferences where people are nice to each other instead of being unnecessarily aggressive. And, conferences are necessary. They're great fun to go to. And I hope that we are going to move into hybrid-only conferences because it doesn't make sense otherwise. Hybrid is the way to go, hybrid or online. But yeah, I hope that I've just given you a bit of an insight into what happens at academic conferences, because if you know any scientists in your life, you know me, we always mention like, yeah, I'm going to a conference. And I just hope to demystify what happens at conferences. And I'm actually hoping, I'm not completely sure yet if I will be able to, but both in Vienna and especially in the conference in Italy, I'm hoping to do a couple of live streams talking about what's been happening at the conference, what we've been discussing, kind of like join me at the conference type thing. Last year we did this at Cosmology from Home. This year there's not so much interest. I tried to get people to join me today. There just wasn't interest for it. But I think there's going to be an official outreach event for the conference on Monday next week. It's still to be confirmed, but there might be an official event happening. But when I'm in Vienna and when I'm in Sister, I am very much going to try to get some outreach going. And maybe I can give you all some inner perspective of this is what we're doing today at this conference, because science should be for everyone. Science should be open and inclusive, and everyone should know what's happening. This is also why I don't like invitation-only conferences, but that's a whole other thing. So I will try to bring you live from the conference kind of feedback footage. Obviously not recording the actual talks because of privacy reasons, and that's up to every individual speaker. But I will try to do some streams from the conferences. But there will actually be a slight hiatus in Cup of Cosmology now. Sunday next week, I'm traveling to Vienna. The Sunday the following week, I'm traveling to Sister. So 17th of July, there will not be a Cup of Cosmology. 24th of July, there will not be a Cup of Cosmology. I hope that at the two conferences, I can do some type of event, some type of stream, but I can't make any promises. So the next guaranteed episode of Cup of Cosmology will be on the 31st of July. Let me just confirm the dates because I cannot think 21 days in the future, although 10 plus 21 is math I should be able to do. 31st of July is the next confirmed Cup of Cosmology. I will try to do some events in between, but for sure I'll be back on the 31st of July, and I will have a guest with me. It's going to be fun. We have some core topics lined up, including like electron weak phase transitions, particle cosmology connections, some cool topics. Still, we'll confirm more details later, but that will be on the 31st of July. And then in August, middle of August, I should have a guest joining me that I'm super excited about. Not going to give anything away, but potentially middle of August, a stream that I've been really looking forward to doing for some time now. So those are to come, but in the meantime, next week I won't be online. The week after I won't be online, but maybe I will do some events from the conferences. As always, huge thanks to everyone who's joined. It's always great to have you here. It's great to have all of the questions. You have all had some really cool questions about conferences. I hope to just demystify the whole thing a bit. And as always, I went on a few small rants. I hope I contained the rants a bit today. Someday I'm just going to do a whole stream ranting, but that's also saved for another day. If you haven't done so already, please like the stream, leave a comment, subscribe if you haven't subscribed already. Help me build the audience. I appreciate each and every one of you. Thank you, everyone, so very much for joining me today. It's been great fun. I hope to see you all again very, very soon. And in the meantime, I hope you all stay safe and take care of each other.